frankly, I'm absolutely shocked at what the inquiry let him get away with. I mean, they uncovered all these things about not planning correctly and all this stuff, and just to not think about how he could have done things differently. And I mean, I've just come from the Middle East, and I know very well the story of Iraqi refugees and how many millions of families this Iraq war has completely decimated, whether but killed or refugees or everything. And to talk about things in that way and not even admit you've done something even slightly wrong is just such a jarring display of kind of pride and arrogance, and this kind of narcissistic Tony Blair personality.
So what did you do? I mean, did you go in today thinking that you wanted to
I
make...
didn't. I was just one of these lucky randoms because I don't know if it's actually a nice thing to go through that experience. I was meant to be in the additional room. Yesterday they called me and said, you can sit in the big room with Tony Blair. But you kind of sit in there, and it really felt like we'd given him this platform to kind of spin not just his story about the Iraq war, but this crazy belligerent stance about attacking Iran and Al-Qaeda in Iran being the threat, when, it was the insecurity created by the invasion that created the space for these two forces to come in.
And you were sitting within the families at the time?
I was sitting at the back. There was a couple of ladies who'd lost sons who were with me, who were really distraught and felt really, really cheated kind of in some way by the process, and it was quite emotional, yeah.
And what did you call out?
I can't even really remember. I think he said he had no regrets, and I said not even one regret, something like that. But I mean, it was just really
and then
demoralising to be in there, frankly.
And Sir John Chilcot was quite quick to shut you up. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I guess. I mean, I wasn't really planning to heckle or anything. It's just, when you're in that situation and you're kind of faced with what just seems like something that's so removed from the reality of the situation, I think you just kind of come out with stuff. So I wasn't planning to heckle anything.
You sound disappointed with what you've heard.
Yeah.
Well, you sound angry. Clearly you are.
Yeah.
What were you expecting to hear today?
That's a very good question. A lot of people have said, what are you going to get out of it? Tony Blair's going to, use it as a platform. And I don't know. What I was hoping for was some searching questions. I think the panel, they asked some stuff that kind of raised some points which they could have followed up on. But I just thought they let him get away with it. And his whole, I have quite a lot of experience in the Middle East. I speak Arabic and I speak Farsi. And I just think it's amazing that Tony Blair has such incredible ignorance of how people feel in the region. They feel that Al-Qaeda is a response to what he's doing there, and it's just, I don't know. I was amazed at what I had today.
He was talking in the middle of the morning, and also just before the close, really, about this 2010 question, this idea the toppling of Saddam Hussein might indeed have prevented a nuclear arms race in the Middle East between Iran and Iraq. You know the area well. You speak the language. What do you make of that?
I mean, frankly, I just think it's delusional. I mean, the Tony Blair I saw today, I think, is a guy who's been secluded away because of all the paranoia from society, and he's kind of developed this slightly paranoid interpretation of Middle East politics. And so he's trying to, it seems like every time it adds a new layer of kind of complexity. So personally, I think it's ridiculous, but yeah.
So in terms of the questioning today, you thought it was on the right lines, but not insistent enough?
Yeah, it wasn't insistent enough. I felt they didn't have the expertise. I mean, I felt, in terms of skills, he was wrapping them a little bit around his finger. But I'm sure the wider British public, having seen it on TV, will make their own kind of judgments.
And James, were you one of the protesters in 2003 in the lead-up to the war in Iraq? Were you here demonstrating?
I was living in Spain, actually. I was living in Spain, so I wasn't in... They had a lot of demonstrations in Spain against what was happening there, but I wasn't in the UK at the time. No.
James, thanks ever so much for joining us. Appreciate your time here.
No
James Sadder, who was inside the inquiry, giving us some of the views of what he felt the panel, the inquiry, had failed to address, and certainly that displeasure with Tony Blair's response when he was asked, not once but twice, if he had any regrets. Well, outside here, we're just seeing the tail end of the demonstration to meet Tony Blair, we assume, at his departure. There has been a demonstration with Stop the War and CND Coalition throughout the day, and Tom Simons has been with them. Tom.
Yes, Emily, I think what's happening here is that there are fewer people at this location, but some of the protesters have gone to some of the other possible exits for the former Prime Minister from the QE2 centre itself in an attempt to see him come out, they would dearly love to see Tony Blair and make their points directly and loudly to him, as they've been doing throughout the day. I think that's fairly unlikely, because we've certainly not been able to work out how he's getting in and out of this building so far, at least. But they have been here all day, and they've been making very clearly the point that an inquiry of the sort that's been going on today is not enough for the protesters. They would like him to see the inside of a court and face criminal charges in relation to his decisions before the Iraq War. In total, 300 maybe protesters have been here at some points in the day, generally about 200 in this location, having speeches, hearing the names of some of those who've lost their lives read out, and making the point again that they feel that this was an unjust war.
Tom Simon's there with the protesters during the day. Tom, thanks very much indeed. Well, a little bit earlier, my colleague James Landale caught up with Tony Blair's former flatmate and his Lord Chancellor at the time, Charlie Faulkner, who was explaining why those key issues of WMD, weapons of mass destruction, and regime change couldn't easily be separated.
Containment was the policy pre-9/11. Post 9/11, the policy was disarmament, because there's a difference between containment on the one hand and disarmament on the other. What Tony Blair has said in the course of the evidence he's given this morning is they were both agreed in April 2002 at Crawford that Saddam Hussein had to be dealt with. What that meant was disarmed. The UN route was taken, though that was agreed after April 2002, and President Bush understood, Tony Blair said, that if Saddam Hussein did disarm, then there would not be the use of force. But there was no prospect of Saddam disarming unless there was the credible threat of force.
But isn't the argument that actually these phrases, we were with the Americans, we would be with the Americans, were all euphemisms for, in extremis, we would go for military action?
Yes,
and this was not a case that was being made to the British public at the time.
It was made clear time and time again that the preferred route was that the UN regime would be successful in disarming Saddam Hussein. But it was also made clear that if it wasn't successful, then force might well have to be used.
But the former Prime Minister made clear this morning, in almost his opening remarks, he said that force was always an option even before 9/11. That was the new element of his argument.
No, that's not new. I think the position had always been that force had from time to time had to be used to enforce the disarmament regime. You'll recall that in 1998, both America and the UK used force to contain Saddam Hussein's attempts to break the terms of the disarmament regime at that particular time. So force had been used before 2001. It was part of the possibilities that were open under the UN regime. But what Tony was saying after 9/11, the idea of leaving somebody like Saddam Hussein, as it were, uncontained, unstopped from using his arms, became in effect an impossibility. That's why it was so important, first of all, to try to disarm him by the UN regime, but if that failed, then by force. And of course, if you're using force to disarm him, that in effect means removing Saddam as the controller of Iraq.
Charlie Faulkner speaking to James Landale a little earlier. Well, no one has been listening and watching to today's events more closely than those bereaved families who've lost sons and daughters in the conflict in Iraq and indeed in Afghanistan. And Reg Keyes, who lost his son, Lance Corporal Tom Keyes, in 2003 at the very beginning of that invasion, joins me now. And Reg Keyes, people will remember you famously standing against Tony Blair in the 2005 election, proving your point there. What have you made of what you've heard today?
What I've seen and heard today in the conference room hasn't surprised me. People have said to me, am I disappointed that he wasn't more exposed? And no, this man is a consummate professional, skilled politician, skilled lawyer, who's able to deliver his lines, and I will put them as lines because he has practiced what he's going to do. But for me, what has come across, especially in this afternoon session, is how inept the government was in preparing for war, planning for war, and indeed the aftermath of war. And what was quite moving towards the end of the session, that he didn't show any regret whatsoever when asked on a couple of occasions by Sir John, do you have any regrets? He could have at least said, I regret the death toll, both Iraqi and the British forces. But he was quite cold on that and didn't show any regrets at all.
We're just watching these pictures showing the panel